The morning air in Kuldrath was cold and heavy with fog when the guards dragged Elira through the stone gates of the arena. Her wrists were bound with rope, and her bare feet ached from the long walk across frozen ground. She did not cry. She had promised herself that morning, while sitting alone in a locked cell, that she would not give the elders the satisfaction of seeing her fear. The arena was an old and terrible place. It had been carved into the side of the mountain generations ago, a wide bowl of packed dirt surrounded by rings of stone seats that rose high enough to hold half the pack. It was where challenges were settled, where criminals were punished, and where, more than once, lives had ended in front of a silent, watching crowd. Elira had grown up hearing stories about the arena. She had never imagined she would be thrown into it herself. Her crime, according to the pack elders, was defiance. A rival pack from the eastern hills had sent word that they wanted a bride to seal a new alliance, and the elders had chosen Elira for the offer. She was an Omega, low in rank, with no parents left to protect her, and no voice loud enough to be heard in council. They believed she would simply accept her fate, as Omegas were expected to do, but Elira had refused. She had stood in front of the elders and told them plainly that she would not be given away like a piece of property to a man she had never met, a man known across the territories for his cruelty. For that refusal, she was sentenced to the arena, to face whatever punishment the elders decided was fitting for her insolence. She had heard whispers the night before that a challenger had been arranged, a fighter from the very pack that had asked for her hand. It seemed a cruel joke that the same alliance she had refused to serve would be the one to end her life, but she supposed cruelty was simply how the elders operated. They wanted to send a message to every Omega in the territory: obey or suffer the consequences. The guards released her at the center of the ring and stepped back through the gate, sealing it behind them. Elira knelt in the dirt for a moment, catching her breath, feeling the eyes of the crowd pressing down on her like weight. She lifted her head and looked around at the stands. They were full. Every rank of the pack had come to watch, from the lowest servant to the highest elder. She searched the crowd without meaning to, wondering if anyone there might feel even a flicker of pity for her. She saw none. Then, on the far side of the arena, the great iron gate began to grind open. Elira braced herself. She expected chains. She expected a snarling animal or a hardened fighter sent to finish her quickly and without mercy. Instead, a single figure walked through the opening, and the crowd's murmuring turned to confused silence. It was Kale. The Alpha King of the Northern Wolves stepped into the ring alone, with no guards beside him and no weapon in his hands. He wore no crown, no ceremonial cloak, nothing that marked him as royalty, except the way the entire crowd instantly went still at the sight of him. His boots were dusted with mud, as though he had traveled a long way in a hurry. His eyes, when they finally found Elira across the arena floor, were red-rimmed and glassy with unshed tears. Nobody in the stands understood what was happening. This was not part of the plan the elders had arranged. The challenger from the eastern pack was supposed to enter that gate, not their own king. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd, but Kale did not look at any of them. He crossed the dirt floor in long, purposeful strides, his gaze locked only on Elira, until he reached her and dropped to his knees in front of her, heedless of the mud soaking into his clothes. He reached out and gently lifted her chin so their eyes met. His hand trembled. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice breaking, carrying far enough that even the closest rows of the crowd could hear it. "I am so sorry it took me this long to reach you." Elira stared at him, too stunned to speak. She had never spoken more than a few words to the Alpha King in her life. She had seen him from a distance during pack gatherings, always composed, always commanding, never anything less than the powerful leader everyone described him to be. She had never imagined she would see him like this, kneeling in the dirt of the punishment arena, tears sliding freely down his face in front of his entire pack. "I did not know," Kale continued, his hands still cradling her face, as if she might disappear if he let go. "I was at the border when the elders passed judgment on you. Nobody sent word until it was almost too late. I have been riding through the night. I only just arrived." Around them, the crowd had fallen into complete silence, straining to hear every word. Elira finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Why does it matter to you? I am nobody. I am an Omega with no family and no rank. Why would the Alpha King care what happens to someone like me? Kale's jaw tightened, and something fierce flickered behind the tears in his eyes. You are not nobody, he said. You have never been nobody, not to me. He rose to his feet, pulling her gently up with him, and turned to face the silent stands. His voice, when he spoke again, was no longer soft with grief. It was the voice of a king, addressing his people, strong and clear enough to reach every seat in the arena. Months ago, he said, before I became consumed with matters at the border, I crossed paths with this woman in the eastern woods. It was a chance meeting, nothing more than a passing moment on a hunting trail. But in that moment, my wolf recognized something I could not ignore, a bond. The kind that comes only once, if it comes at all. A wave of gasps swept through the crowd. Elira felt her own breath catch in her throat. She remembered that day in the woods, remembered the tall stranger who had helped her free her foot from a tangle of roots, and then vanished before she could learn his name. She had thought of him often since, never once imagining he was the Alpha King himself. I said nothing, Kale continued, his voice tightening with something like shame. I told no one. I was afraid of what the elders would say about a king bonding with an Omega of low rank. Afraid of the political games that would follow. Afraid, foolishly, that silence would protect her from the very people who ended up nearly costing her life. He turned back to Elira, and the tears returned to his eyes even as he tried to steady his voice. My silence is the true failure here, he said, quieter now, meant only for her, though the whole arena still heard it. Not your refusal to be traded away like property, not your defiance in front of the elders. You were right to refuse. You were right to want to choose your own path. I am the one who failed you, by not claiming you the moment I knew what you meant to me. Elira felt tears rising in her own eyes now, unbidden. She had walked into the arena that morning prepared to die alone, abandoned by everyone who was supposed to protect her. She had not expected this. She had not expected to be seen, truly seen, by anyone, let alone the king of the northern wolves. You cannot mean this, she whispered. You do not even know me. I know enough, Kale said. I know you helped an old woman carry firewood up the hill last winter without ever telling anyone, because a servant mentioned it to me in passing, and I never forgot it. I know you refused an alliance that would have benefited you personally, because you would not let yourself be used as a bargaining piece. I know that when they threw you into this arena, you did not beg, and you did not break. That is enough for me to know you are not what the elders claim you are. The crowd remained frozen, watching the exchange unfold, as though witnessing something that would be spoken about for years to come. Somewhere in the stands, the elders who had arranged Elira's punishment sat rigid with fury and disbelief, realizing too late that their plan had unraveled in front of the entire pack. Kale turned toward them now, his expression hardening into something colder and more commanding. You sentenced a woman to die in this arena while I was away defending our borders, he said, his voice carrying across the stone seats like thunder. You did this without my knowledge, without my consent, and without any regard for what she means to this pack's future. You conspired against my chosen mate. The word mate rippled through the crowd like a spark catching dry grass. By the laws of our people, Kale continued, an act against the mate of the Alpha is an act against the Alpha himself. I could treat this as a declaration of rebellion. I choose, instead, to treat it as what it truly was, a failure of judgment born from prejudice against Omegas, a prejudice I will no longer tolerate within my council. He raised a hand, and with a single, decisive word, he overturned Elira's sentence. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the guards who had dragged her into the arena that morning now stood uncertain, waiting for further instruction, unsure whether to celebrate or fear what came next. The elders responsible for the sentencing were stripped of their positions before the sun had fully risen over the mountain. They were banished from the council chambers they had ruled for decades, Their authority dissolved in front of witnesses who could no longer pretend they had not seen their king weep for a woman they had tried to destroy. Kale did not wait for the formalities to finish before turning back to Alira. He wiped the last of his tears with the back of his hand, though more threatened to fall, and offered her his arm. "I cannot undo what almost happened to you today," he said softly. "I cannot erase the fear you must have felt walking into this place, but I promise you, from this moment forward, you will never again stand alone against those who wish to harm you. Whatever comes next, we face it together, as equals, as mates." Alira looked at the arena around her, at the crowd that had gathered to watch her punishment and instead witnessed her king's confession of love and grief. She looked at the open gate behind them, the same gate she had walked through that morning, believing she would never leave the arena alive. Slowly she took his arm. Together they walked out of the arena, not through the shadows of shame and punishment, but through a crowd that now watched in a stunned, reverent silence, witnessing the moment their king had chosen love and justice over silence and fear. The story of that morning spread quickly through every corner of the Northern Territory, carried by pack members who had seen it with their own eyes and could not stop speaking of it. They spoke of the king, who had ridden through the night to reach the arena in time. They spoke of his tears, undisguised and unashamed, in front of an entire watching pack. They spoke of the Omega woman who had walked into the ring, expecting death, and walked out as the future of the Alpha line. But most of all, they spoke of the moment silence had finally been broken, and a bond too long hidden had finally been allowed to stand in the light, where it could never again be threatened by those who thought love had a rank, or that some lives mattered less than others.